Good morning. My name is Nancy Yuen. I'm Vice President and Director of the Washington Office of the Asia Foundation. I'd like to welcome you here this morning for a very exciting release of a new publication, Emerging Lessons on Women's Entrepreneurship in the Asia Pacific, with case studies from the Asian Development Bank and the Asia Foundation. For those of you who may be less familiar with the Asia Foundation, we have worked for a very long time, over 60 years, in Asia. We have had a long-standing program through 18 offices that we have throughout Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. And one of our major areas of focus is women's empowerment. We're pleased to be co-hosting this event with the Asian Development Bank today. The foundation recently signed a knowledge partnership agreement with the ADB to expand our cooperation on development efforts in the region. This cooperation will extend to 4 specific areas for the time being: strengthening governance and the public sector, increasing environmental resilience, and supporting regional cooperation, and most importantly for us today, empowering women. We're very much looking forward to our cooperation with the bank. As you may have heard, the Asia Foundation's programs have worked for decades to strengthen women's and girls' rights and security, political participation, and economic opportunity. Specific to women's empowerment, we're committed to improving women's opportunities to engage in entrepreneurship and participate fully in economic life, working at multiple levels to address legal, regulatory, and social constraints. Under the partnership, last year our Women's Empowerment Program and the Asian Development Bank's gender teams came together to take stock of lessons from the complementary work on entrepreneurship that we've done over the years. This report provides an assessment of the current situation of women's entrepreneurship in the region and includes key recommendations. I'm pleased to introduce today our co-host, Bart Edish, representative of the North American office of the Asian Development Bank here in Washington. Bart came to Washington in October, but is no stranger to our area as a graduate of Georgetown. And for those of you Big Ten fans, he also went to Michigan. His prior ADB experience included responsibility for knowledge management, social development, and gender equity. Please join me in welcoming Bart to the podium.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Nancy, for that introduction. And thanks to the Asia Foundation for the great partnership that has led to the publication and now the launch of this publication. Gender has been a key area for cooperation between the Asian Development Bank and the Asia Foundation, and as has been mentioned, we have a cooperation agreement that focuses on different areas. And I very much personally look forward to this being a springboard to closer interaction between our organizations and building on our synergies to get even more done together. Just 3 months ago, ADB's Board of Directors approved our new long-term strategic framework, what we call Strategy 2030, aligned intentionally with other global agreements, such as, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreement, and accelerating progress in gender equality in Asia and the Pacific is one of the 7 operational priorities of this new long-term strategy. And it's one of the very few areas where we have specific targets representing our commitment to gender equality. So under this strategy, we're going to concentrate on 5 particular areas, and perhaps the most relevant to the launch of today's report is that promoting women's economic empowerment is a key part of these 5, and that includes attention to quality jobs, improved skills, entrepreneurship, access to productive resources, financial inclusion, and maximizing marketing opportunities through infrastructure. A second of these 5 focus areas is advancing gender equality and human development, and this includes health and education, which are sectors that a mostly infrastructure bank is paying more and more attention to. So the third area under our new strategy, and more specifically under pursuing gender equality, we'll be looking at decision-making and leadership and what we can do to strengthen women's role in that. Also, the issue of time poverty, reducing time poverty of women through basic infrastructure, such as water, sanitation, and household electrification. And finally, strengthening women's resilience to shocks, think climate change and disasters, the Asian Pacific region being the most disaster-prone part of the world. So across these 5 areas, ADB will aim to address more deep-rooted gender inequalities and discrimination, such as gender-based violence, changing gender-related social and cultural norms about women's and men's values, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and the gender gaps in access to transformative technology. With regard to promoting women's entrepreneurship, again, coming back to the report today, um, ADB supports women entrepreneurs primarily by engaging financial institutions that provide services to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. We provide loans, we facilitate guarantees, and we make equity investments for these financial institutions to help women entrepreneurs. And targets for women-led enterprises in accessing such services are normally set in the process. We also combine these financial transactions with policy dialogue with governments in Asia and the Pacific on SME laws, small, medium-sized enterprise laws, and policy reforms so that the institutional frameworks include mechanisms to support women-led enterprises. And you'll get a taste of this in case study number 2 on how various policy tools have been used to support women's businesses. Sometimes ADB provides technical assistance grants, and these are added to build capacity of financial institutions to better reach women customers. We also directly support women startups and entrepreneurs through business training, financial literacy training, and facilitation of networking in collaboration with women chambers of commerce and other local partners. Case study number 1 shares the successful experience in Bangladesh of such efforts. And fintech is an area that ADB is increasingly engaged in and provides huge opportunities for empowering women entrepreneurs. A basic non-cash transaction, such as online banking, has improved women's access to finance. In Papua New Guinea, for example, women beneficiaries of mobile banking, a program called MyCash with the nationwide microbank, has reported reduced incidences of violence as women no longer have to carry cash. It is included in case study number 3, and that's one of the parts of this report that I find particularly insightful and useful. Moving forward, ADB is committed to expand on our support to financial inclusion for women, and this publication's findings on regional trends, lessons learned, and future areas of research and programming are all very timely. One of our recent experiences is with the Global Fund of the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative, which you will hear about more today, and happy to have the head of this fund, Priya, here today. Earlier this year, ADB was very fortunate to receive a $12.6 million grant from this fund, and we are using this grant in Sri Lanka to blend finance and undertake innovative training that targets women entrepreneurs, including in rural areas, and to support more gender-inclusive business with 8 partner banks in that South Asian nation. This pilot initiative and others like it give us a good example of what works and how it works and what can possibly be done in the future in terms of replication or scaling up. So I want, in terms of closing up the introduction to this program, I want to thank once more the Asia Foundation for its great work in organizing this and their central role in preparing the report, and recognize at the same time the efforts of policymakers, donors, and other stakeholders in supporting women's entrepreneurship in Asia and the Pacific through gender-responsive and evidence-based investments and programs. I also thank all of you for taking time out of your morning schedules to join us today, to hear the interesting case studies and this expert panel that's been assembled. And so while we are all working to promote women's entrepreneurship in different ways, we all share one clear goal, and that is to enable women to reach their full economic potential. So at this stage, I'd like to welcome Jane Sloan, who, as many of you know, is the director of the Women's Empowerment Program here at the Asia Fund, to lead us into the next part of the program. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I know that there's a lot of expertise in the room, so we're really looking forward to a very robust question session afterwards. We've allowed about 30 minutes for questions after our panel session this morning to really take advantage of your own expertise and perspectives as well. We're really delighted both to have the panel here this morning, but also more broadly to be part of this knowledge partnership that Nancy mentioned, it's really given our team, the Women's Empowerment team, the opportunity to work very closely with ADB's gender team. And I think that we've recognised just how much complementarity we have in our approaches to supporting women entrepreneurs. And I think it's really allowed us to go deep in thinking about what really needs to happen in the time ahead, what the imperatives are, what the opportunities are, what the circuit breakers are in addressing some of the structural challenges that we see in terms of advancing women's entrepreneurship. And we were also lucky enough to secure the services of Kate Francis and Vijaya Nagarajan, who co-wrote the report that you have today. And we're also fortunate to have Kate Francis on our panel this morning, together with the other speakers. So with that introduction, I'll just briefly, you have a broader set of biographies for the speakers this morning, but I'll introduce them briefly before we start our panel discussion. Priya Basu, to my far left, heads up the newly established Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative Secretariat, more commonly known as WEFI, at the World Bank Group. Priya joined the Bank Group in 1998, and she's had various positions, most recently as manager in the Development Finance Vice Presidency, where she designed and managed a US $21 billion portfolio of multi-donor partnership funds to address global priorities such as food security, climate change, refugees, and pandemic threats. So that's very impressive, Priya. Maza Naran is a consultant for the Asia Foundation's Women's Business Centre and Incubator Project in Mongolia, right in the middle here. And previously, Zaya served as the Women's Business Centre Project Manager and as the Asia Foundation's Governance Program Deputy Manager in Mongolia. In past positions, Zaya worked on service delivery and governance reforms, and she managed programs and grants in governance, law, and regional cooperation activities. And we're very fortunate to now have Zaya based here in Washington. And Kate Francis is an independent consultant focusing on women's empowerment, children and youth, human trafficking, and the intersection of business and human rights. Previously, with her work with the Asia Foundation's Women's Empowerment Program, Kate provided technical and program support to the Foundation's 18 offices throughout Asia, primarily focusing on human trafficking, women's rights and security, and gender mainstreaming. So with that introduction of our illustrious panel, can I start with you, Kate? Of course, you've conducted an extensive literature program review that informed this publication. You've also, of course, had extensive experience working in the not-for-profit sector, and you're one of the lead authors of this report. So given that experience, could you share some of the most important findings that you think we really need to pay attention to, both in terms of the key challenges that women entrepreneurs face, as well as what you have seen as being the most effective forms of responding to those challenges and what we really need to pay attention to in the time ahead?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane. And first, I want to thank you and the Women's Empowerment Program team at the Asia Foundation. Kind of feels like I'm coming home in a way. For giving me the opportunity to join you and work on this amazing project. And I'd also like to thank the ADB's gender team. I think they were incredibly instrumental in ensuring that this report had all of our best thoughts and our best research. And I think that we were able to distill what felt like mountains of data into what we hope is a very succinct and user-friendly report. Our report draws on several dozens of resources, some of which are global, but the vast majority of which are focused specifically on Asia. And I think it's worth noting that the sheer number of publications that are out there, I think is an indication of that promoting women's entrepreneurship is a top global concern, and is particularly a top regional concern. That said, it is abundantly clear that women in every country in Asia face fundamental barriers to starting and growing their own businesses. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll focus on just a couple that are kind of most notable to me as we were going through and writing this report. First is access to finance. I think that that's one of the most critical areas that we highlight in the report. And The credit gap, admittedly, is significant for both men and women in Asia, but because of these multiple layers of gender-based barriers, women's access to formal credit is disproportionately restricted. For example, in East Asia and the Pacific, the formal finance gap for women entrepreneurs is 58%, while for men it's only 42%. So it's significant. And I think this is for many reasons. Formal banks are often ill-equipped to meet the needs of women entrepreneurs. For one thing, women tend to lack the traditional forms of collateral, such as land, houses, cash, other assets that banks often require to determine creditworthiness. And at the same time, even if they do possess those things, they still feel intimidated and unwelcome when they enter the doors of a formal bank, for a host of reasons that range from the fact that loan officers, who are often male, may use complicated terminology or may harbor open or unconscious bias against women, or the fact that typical banking hours sometimes don't align with the requirements of a woman's day that often falls disproportionately on her back to deal with the care issues in her family. So that leaves us with microfinance then, which is important and widely available, particularly for startup. But I think experts are increasingly noting that there's actually a risk in trapping entrepreneurs in small scale, low productivity activities that can actually push their households into debt rather than help them grow their businesses. So one fairly straightforward strategy, I think it's fairly intuitive, is to expanding women's access to formal credit, is to make banks more responsive to women entrepreneurs. Some banks have actually hired more women as senior staff. This seems fairly obvious, but it actually makes a really big difference. Hiring women or encouraging women to be on boards of banks. It's these small ways of basically improving the products that banks offer, and the services and the environments. It just makes it easier for women clients to even enter the bank. Another emerging option that I think is worth noting is the alternative credit assessment strategies. So including psychometric testing, which is a short behavioral science questionnaire that considers personality traits and business knowledge, and importantly, does not ask about the sex of the applicant and can be done online. So that's a way to avoid kind of potential gender bias on the parts of loan officers. So another barrier that I think is worth noting very quickly, I realize, is the unfriendly business environment for women entrepreneurs and their lack of networks. This is definitely a problem across the region. Women tend to lag in this area behind men across the board. Influential women-only business associations and women's chambers of commerce are on the rise in most every country in Asia. And these are venues for women to share their experiences and their networks and to help them establish and grow their business. And even beyond this peer-to-peer networking opportunity, I think the big potential for these groups is to morph into more of like an angel investment group opportunity, where high net worth individual women who can provide seed funding and mentoring to women who are just starting their businesses. This doesn't happen across Asia in any kind of frequency. It's not very prevalent, but it could be, and I think it could be a kind of sea changer if it could happen on scale. I think we should also note that having women-only associations, though, it has limitations, and this is true across Asia, that these women businesses tend to be focused on the low profit, low productivity kind of sectors. And if you limit the mixed gender networking, women are less able to branch out into those kind of male-dominated sectors that are more profitable. So ultimately, I mean, this is a plug for getting a lot of programs for STEM for women and for girls in educational opportunities, but that's a long-term strategy. But in general, we should figure out ways for women to engage men who are in these sectors that can act as allies and bring them in. if that's is like family or friends, but figuring out ways to do that en masse, I think would do a lot for expanding women's access to these important networks.
Thanks, Kate. You've covered so much ground in that 5 minutes, and I think there's a lot that we'll actually follow up with in the questions ahead. I think that issue of institutional bias is such an endemic one, and I know that when I was working with Women's World Banking, what we discovered was a lot of banks in some countries had computers defaulting to a male borrower. So the assumption was that any borrower would be male, and the loan assessors, particularly going to rural areas, would focus on the men's business, even if it was in the field, would ignore the mum and pop cafes that the women were running, even though they were more profitable because of, again, that inherent bias. I think too, what you were saying about access to networks is important. I think one of the really interesting things in the report is focusing on the fact that there's a lot of talk about mentoring women entrepreneurs, whereas in fact what we need are more sponsors, more people, male or female, to open up those networks, open up that access, rather than mentors who might act as a sounding board and provide that moral support, but not necessarily help women to get to a different place. And I think that what you're saying in terms of some of the other issues that we need to look at, particularly the pathways of girls through education right through to becoming entrepreneurs, is really important, and it speaks to a more holistic approach to really addressing and coming at these issues. And of course, one of the things that the Asia Foundation really pays attention to in terms of our work in both empowering women and advancing gender equality is a focus on reaching and engaging the most marginalised women who are often harder to reach. And this is, of course, particularly important when we're thinking about generating or income generating activities. So I know you've had a lot of experience in this area, and particularly the work that you led as the director of the Women's Business Centre in Mongolia. And one of the case studies in the report speaks particularly to the need to promote entrepreneurship across diverse groups of women. And the centre in Mongolia has been very successful in doing this and in reaching some of the most marginalised women, even in fact surpassing the project's own goals in that regard. So we'd love to hear from you about both the ways that the centre supports women entrepreneurs for those people here who aren't familiar with the work of the centre. And then can you speak about how you went about reaching some of the most marginalised women to ensure that they were able to access the activities provided by the centre?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me here today, and also for this opportunity to speak about this fascinating project that we implement in Mongolia. So the Asia Foundation Mongolia office opened the Women's Business Center in summer 2016 through funding from Korean International Cooperation Agency. So it's been operational for over 2 years now. And at the center, we provide regular business skills training and provide networking, different kind of networking events and opportunities, co-working space, business library, and also, very importantly, childcare facility. So if you look at these activities, it seeks to help women entrepreneurs to overcome the challenges that they face while running business, which are the major challenges are, of course, lack of business skills and knowledge, and networking opportunities, as well as access to finance. And because it's been, the Women's Business Center is currently the only woman-dedicated business center, the demand has been quite overwhelming consistently since the beginning. And so far, we have trained more than 5,000 women in different business skills, set of skills and knowledge, including how to write business proposal, how to engage with customers on social media, and marketing skills, basic accounting, and all sorts of different trainings at different levels of business stages. And also, the Women's Business Center has the client base of around 3,000 women. And these are, as Jane just mentioned, these are the number that sometimes tripled our original target numbers when we start the project. So the demand has been quite high, and also, yeah, as Jane mentioned, the emphasis is for the women from vulnerable groups, marginalized groups, including women with disabilities, women who have disabled children as well, and also survivors of domestic violence, and migrant women from the countryside. So in order to reach those women, we work very closely with the communities and organizations who work with these groups, including Wheelchair Association, Blind Association, National Center Against Violence, and these network proven to be working quite well to reaching those women. And also, once the support network is there, it creates this welcoming environment for women from marginalized, the vulnerable group, to actually have this venue where they can come and learn from each other, share experience, and openly share their challenges and experience while running business. And one of also the key core activity at the Women's Business Center is Business Incubator Program that we run. It's an accelerated program that runs for 4 months, and selected women go through more advanced level of trainings, provided small seed fund to start their program, start their business, and also matched with mentors, and also participate in different pop-up shops, exhibition sales events to generate more income once they're starting their business. And so apart from these quantitative results, one of the greatest outcome of the project so far has been this, as I briefly mentioned, this support network that's created organically, and that this safe space for women, for them to share knowledge and experience, and just empowering each other using this platform. Women's Business Center has been quite.
I think it's a great model, and I think we're looking at what we might learn in other countries from the Women's Business Center. As you said, it's a very strong support network for women entrepreneurs. I think it's also, one of the other things that's being looked at the moment is the potential of supporting survivors of trafficking and giving them access to some of the same skills that are being provided at the centre. I know at the moment we're also looking at the potential of creating a green hub within the Women's Business Centre to be able to provide women entrepreneurs with access to some of those higher paid opportunities and green supply chains, and to be able to help them skill build in some of those areas. I think it's easier often for donors to be able to support an entity that represents a number of women entrepreneurs than to actually fund individually. And so beyond that support network is that opportunity for skill building in those higher paid areas and being able to attract more funds as a result of it actually being a centre. So it's a really impressive model. Priya, I want to turn to you now because you have such depth of experience in thinking about these issues, and you've really been coming at the challenges for women entrepreneurs as well as the opportunities from a very comprehensive, integrated lens. And so for those here who aren't familiar with the WeFi initiative, would you be able to firstly explain more about what it means, what it entails, what it hopes to achieve, and then share what you're learning about successful approaches to supporting women's entrepreneurship, and also what resonates most with you in the report in terms of your own experience and what you're seeking to achieve with this new initiative.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Asia Foundation and to the Asian Development Bank for inviting me. So let me start by telling you a little bit about WeFi, the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative. We've just celebrated our first anniversary. We were announced at the G20 summit in Hamburg in July 2017, and then formally established in October 2017 at the World Bank IMF annual meetings. We're a collaborative partnership, a collaborative multi-donor partnership with financial contributions from 14 governments. And it's a very diverse group of governments, and it's really the first time that such a wide range of governments has come together around the issue of gender equality. So WeFi focuses on small and medium enterprises, women-owned, women-led SMEs, the premise being that really is the missing middle, and that the contribution of small and medium enterprises to women's economic empowerment is potentially tremendous. And yet there are huge barriers that face women-owned, women-led SMEs around the developing world. The philosophy of WeFi is that there's been a number of funds that have tried to tackle the problems facing women entrepreneurs kind of through single issue type, you know, some initiatives that focus just on access to finance, some that focus on improving access to marketing, some that provide mentoring and capacity building. And those haven't really been that successful because addressing the barriers that face women-owned, women-led SMEs really requires a multi-pronged, comprehensive approach. So WeFi takes this kind of comprehensive ecosystem approach to addressing the problems that face women-owned, women-led businesses. And that's one of the criteria for supporting projects that come to us. When projects come to us, we look at the projects and we sort of want to support ones that take these kinds of comprehensive approaches that have the highest chances of success and sustainability. At the moment, our business model involves working through multilateral development banks. We have 8 pre-accredited multilateral development banks, the Asian Development Bank being one of them, the World Bank, the IFC, the Inter-American Development Bank, EBRD, the Islamic Development Bank, and so on. And from time to time, we issue calls for proposals with all the details in terms of the kinds of proposals that we want to support. The first call for proposals was launched last October, and it was already mentioned by Bart that the Asian Development Bank got $12.5 million through that first call. And in fact, just yesterday, we issued our second call for proposals, which will close in February 2019. And these calls then support projects or programs that are submitted to us by the multilateral development banks. In the first call, we received a proposal from the ADB, which focuses on, I would say, a very innovative project in Sri Lanka, which works through 8 commercial banks. We also awarded $75 million to the World Bank Group for a multi-country program that covers projects in 13 countries around the world and a regional project in the Middle East and North Africa region, which again takes this kind of comprehensive multi-pronged approach to tackling the barriers facing women entrepreneurs. And then we awarded a little over $32 million to the Islamic Development Bank for a program in Yemen, Mali, and northern Nigeria. So I should have said that at the very overarching level, the WeFi has 2 goals. One is to leverage resources from commercial and private sources and international financial institutions. For every dollar of grant money that we provide, our aim is to leverage $4 to $5 of additional resources from other sources. And our first call alone, which awarded $120 million, is expected to leverage $1.6 billion in additional resources from commercial and IFI sources. And then the second overarching goal is a focus on the poorest, most fragile, conflict-affected countries. And we want to, over the lifetime of WeFi, allocate at least 50% of resources to those poorest, fragile, and most conflict-affected countries. And I'm happy to say that the first call last year, 58% of the resources that we allocated went to those countries. So we've already surpassed, both our overarching targets through the first award, but now we're looking forward to making the second award. In terms of the gains that are reaped from empowering women and supporting women's entrepreneurship, I don't need to remind this audience, but I think the case has now been made very strongly. There are all kinds of numbers, but most recently there's a figure that says that closing the gender gap in the workforce will yield $28 trillion to the global GDP. And even if you're not aiming to close all barriers, just sort of kind of trying to minimize the gender gap, that apparently would yield $12 trillion to global GDP. when if women are economically empowered, I think everyone benefits, and that case has been made. In terms of the barriers that women entrepreneurs face, I think you've heard from our speakers this morning that there are kind of barriers related to access to finance, which I'm kind of deeply engaged in. I'd be happy to talk about that more later. There's access to marketing and capacity building, and then there are legal, regulatory, and a whole range of policy barriers. And just, I'd just like to share some of the data, not to kind of overburden you with data, but the World Bank produces a report annually called the Women, Business, and the Law Report, and the most recent one surveyed 189 economies. Just to share with you, in 104 of those 189 economies, there was some restriction or the other related to the ability of women to engage in certain sectors, do certain kinds of jobs, work at night, and so on. In 75 of those economies that were surveyed, there was some kind of restriction to women owning to owning land and other forms of property. In 68 countries, there were restrictions on women's freedom of movement and agency, the ability to own a bank account. And those kinds of barriers, once addressed, really do help empower women and allow them to sort of succeed in the workplace. So I'm really happy to see that the report that you spoke about, Kate, and the report that you spoke about, Zaya, this report that we're launching today looks at those issues and aims to address those barriers. So I think I'll stop here and happy to elaborate on some of that later.
So Priya, just drawing on what you've said, both in terms of your relationships with governments as well as the private sector, do you think the Sustainable Development Goals and the momentum around them will really propel governments and businesses to do more sooner in response to some of those gaps and challenges? I noticed in the recent PricewaterhouseCoopers report that surveyed businesses and companies and their commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals. There was a high number of companies that said that in the next 2 years they would be introducing new initiatives or doing more in support of women's empowerment and gender equality with an eye on the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm wondering if that is a factor in really pushing the urgency of reform and change.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of momentum that's been built up. I think there's calls for action all around. There's calls for action in the private sector. We just at the bank a couple of weeks ago had a big event in Silicon Valley where we brought together tech entrepreneurs and a whole range of sort of actors from the private sector to make serious commitments around gender equality and sort of closing the gender gap. So I see a lot of action. I see a lot of momentum. I'd like to think that WeFi is contributing to that. I think the challenges are known, the benefits are widely acknowledged. So now it's time to just act. I was just looking at a report a very nice interactive report that the Council on Foreign Relations has just put out that shows the gains to the world, but also gains to each individual country. You can go into it and look at what gains would be produced for a wide range of countries through closing the gender gap, and then you can sort of look country by country at what the barriers are, and the kinds of barriers they're talking about are education, financial access, laws and regulations, and also unpaid care work.
Right.
So yeah, but to answer your question, I think the momentum is there. It's time to act.
Absolutely, and women entrepreneurs are saying that themselves. I know one of the other things you were telling me before we stepped up onto this panel was the sheer number of emails you receive from individual women entrepreneurs asking for support, which again, I think speaks to the demand. And so with an eye on access to finance, which is what a lot of women entrepreneurs are asking about, SIA, the Women's Business Centre, tackled this access to finance by working both with the government as well as with the private sector and private banks to better support women entrepreneurs in their access to capital. And you've got a great story to tell in terms of the interest rate, particularly that you were able to negotiate for women entrepreneurs to be able to access.
So women entrepreneurs' access to finance being one of the biggest challenges that they face. So taking this urgency and serious consideration seriously, we've done some assessment and research discussions in order to choose our partner bank for the project. And so we chose out the partner bank, which is one of the leading commercial banks in Mongolia. And after a year-long engagement, they launched a specific loan package for our women entrepreneurs and Women's Business Center clients. And the fund comes from the government. So it's this nice example of synergy between the private sector development partner and the government. And this specific loan package that's dedicated for our Women's Business Center clients has the interest rate twice as lower than what's out there currently in Mongolia. The commercial interest rate is around 20% annually in Mongolia, and the bank offers 8 to 10% interest rate loan to our Women's Business Center clients. And not just the loan itself, the given out loan is one thing, but some follow-up action, how they can use this loan efficiently, effectively, and what's the bookkeeping, accounting, and all these kinds of follow-up actions also taken both by the bank and by our Women's Business Center. And so most of our clients at the center, they are micro business owners, mostly based at home, one-person business. So our goal is to make them reach that next level, get out of the home-based office to actually have some office space for them, start hiring, recruiting some people, generating more income, and also create some employment for other women in Mongolia. So this loan is definitely a boost, has very practical outcome, and they used it for equipment purchase, more product development, more prototype, trying experimenting different products, and also using this boost, a lot of our incubator graduates are reaching that next level, getting out of the home-based office, started hiring people, and started paying tax, and being registered off businesses is definitely being the very practical outcomes of this loan.
So I think when we talk about creating an enabling environment, we really are talking about the importance of governments and institutions passing laws and policies that will really support women entrepreneurs, coupled, of course, with paying attention to societal norms and the role that they play. I know that in Mongolia, one of the things that we are soon to be doing is talking with the Prime Minister's office there about the potential of a pro-women procurement policy, pro-women green procurement policy, to really pay attention to the opportunity of giving women entrepreneurs more procurement opportunities, because the overwhelming number of procurement opportunities go to men in most countries, over 90%. And so the opportunity to test this, it's really, I think, the economic equivalent of a quota system in a political environment. And I think that it's one of the things that we haven't necessarily paid enough attention to. It's one of the things that the report points out. I think it's a really exciting development, and particularly in Mongolia, because it would allow those women entrepreneurs at the business centre to work together to be able to jointly bid for some of those procurement opportunities, which is often a lot easier than individual entrepreneurs bidding for that government business. And yet it could be a real game changer because of the level of funding or finance that they could secure from those opportunities, which would take them, it would lift them all in a way. And so I think it's and particularly in the green sector, if we have a green hub at this within the sector, within the centre, supporting women's skill building, and then supporting them to be able to bid for that government business on the basis of those skills. That's exciting. So Kate, in the report, I know it specifically references procurement as one area. What are one or two other key strategies that the report really points out as being essential to creating an enabling environment for women entrepreneurs?
Well, one of the things that really struck me was that there's a lot of data at the regional level, but I think acting on these policies and creating these policies has to be rooted in what's happening in individual countries. Particularly, we're looking at the Pacific Islands, for example. They face some pretty significant, very unique situations in terms of women's access to markets, to finance, to networks, simply because of geography. And so, in another country, it might not make a big difference to have online registration for businesses, but in the Pacific Islands, when they passed this law, it made a huge difference for particularly poor women who then don't have to go island hopping to go, find the nearest urban center to register their business. So these pro-poor kind of and pro-women policies look very different based on the geography, based on social constructions, based on very domestic factors. So I think that's one thing that needs to happen, is that strategy just needs to really be focused domestically. I think there's also a number of really great examples from within Asia about really forward-leaning laws that have been enacted. Particularly, I'm thinking about the Philippines, that has a specific women's microfinance, women's micro enterprise law. And so, having a very specific law that's very focused, it has funding attached to it, it has regulations and quotas, that I think can be implemented in other countries depending on the local situations. But I think the big question here is exactly what is happening as a result. Like, there needs to be more investigation of what that law actually looks like on the ground. Is it being implemented? What does enforcement look like? I couldn't really find a lot of data, even when the Philippines is fairly open in terms of what data is available. I couldn't find a whole lot of so what has happened as a result of this. So I think that is an opportunity for further research, which I know we're going to talk about later, but also for thinking about the examples that we have within the region that can be replicated, but thinking about how the enforcement mechanisms happen locally, I think, is critical.
Yeah, and I think you make a really important point about the differences between Asia and the Pacific. The Pacific really faces challenges such as the geographic isolation and the access to markets, not the same kind of population base. So not lumping them together, but recognizing those distinct and discrete differences as well. I think also what you were saying about being able to apply or learn from the laws in one country and how they might be applicable to other countries. And again, for women entrepreneurs, to be able to learn from what women entrepreneurs in other countries are doing through those exposure visits is often quite valuable in terms of really understanding what's possible at a sub-regional level. I want to, Priya, give you the opportunity to also respond to this question about an enabling environment and what you think is necessary from a government and business perspective to be able to really quickly advance momentum in support of women entrepreneurs.
So before I answer that question, I just want to pick up on the point of on procurement, because that's another issue. It's a focus under WIFI as well. So 30% of registered businesses worldwide are women-owned, 70% are male-owned. But even, we'd rather get to 50-50, but 30% of businesses are women-owned, and yet only 1% of procurement globally by corporations is done from women-owned businesses. So this is something that really needs to be tackled, and that it's not just the private it's not just a problem in the private sector, it's also public corporations. So we have been working with groups like We Connect International and so on to sort of see what it takes to get to change this number. Again, it boils down to the kinds of things that you spoke about. It's helping women make the right kinds of business plans that get them into the supply chain. But the data also shows that even if women enter the supply chain, they fall out of it. So that then ties up, I think, to this whole question of care, and that if there isn't enough sort of if there aren't good childcare and elderly care policies, then women drop out. And when there aren't good childcare and elderly care policies, then corporations hesitate as well in giving contracts to women, because they think, well, this woman is going to join, but then, her business is going to not be able to deliver because she's going to have to drop out. So I think in terms of the enabling environment, stepping up childcare and elderly care policies is a critical priority. And then, of course, I've already spoken a little bit about sort of the other aspects of an enabling environment, the laws, the policies, the regulations. It's kind of easier said than done, but I think, unless these kinds of sort of laws and regulations that I spoke about are addressed, we're not going to be able to give women a fair chance to succeed. So whether it's property rights, whether it's freedom of movement, whether it's ability to own a bank account. Just briefly on kind of owning of bank accounts. So the World Bank brings out something called the Global Findex every year, and the 2018 Findex report came out earlier this year, which showed that we're still way behind, in terms of the gender gap in account ownership, and this gap is sort of persistent. It's hard to bridge. But there's one country that's actually done very well, which is India, which in 2014, for example, I think the gap was 20%. So in terms of account ownership. So 20% less women than men owned a bank account, had a bank account. And that gap is now being bridged to, I think it's now 6%. And one of the key driving forces behind that is the ID, the unique ID, the Aadhaar card. And that has helped because women now are not asked to show property titles, which they don't usually have. Instead, they have a unique ID which they can show, which enables them to open a bank account. So I think the connection between sort of finding new ways to give women sort of the ability to start an account, to sort of deal with bankers, whether it's alternative collateral, whether it's a unique ID. I think these kinds of measures can really help bring women into the formal economy and kind of help them succeed.
I also think in India, SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, has played such a critical role as a cooperative in identifying some of the issues that need to be addressed, in terms of transport, in terms of childcare, in terms of access to insurance. And so that cooperative model, I think, is a very powerful one in India. I know we've got limited time left. So Zaya, I just want to turn to you in thinking about this enabling environment and beyond our policies and laws and access to resources and childcare support. Changing family and community attitudes is a critical part of supporting women entrepreneurs to succeed. Can you share with us any lessons learned from your work in Mongolia regarding how to engage families and community leaders in support of women entrepreneurs?
Among our women entrepreneurs, especially the business incubator graduates, one thing they talk about during the events and presentation is that the family acceptance and the attitude is that they tend to see their business as either there's something they have to do aside, or hobby, or cute business. And the family members urge them to find a real job. Go and find a real job. Stop doing that hobby, cutesy, waste of time thing. It's something that's very commonly discussed among the women entrepreneurs. And I can mention two things that we try to do at the Women's Business Center. First is try to engage the family members and friends more at the events that we organize at the center, being pitching event and presentation event and demo day where they demonstrate how they make their product and how they produce their product, and all other different networking events, and that being quite fun for everyone who's attending. And also another thing that we've been doing is that promotion of our incubator graduates that we do through traditional media outlets and also social networking sites. And our incubator graduates are featured one by one on these major popular media outlets in Mongolia, featured on websites, featured through different TV programs, and which help them to be more visible and make them really become the business owners, women business owners and entrepreneurs. And they said that's been very helpful for them to be accepted by the family members because they look more professional when they're out there in the media, and they look more professional, more official, not just staying at home doing something that they think are not generating income. So engaging them in different networking and public events and also media promotion has been it's been mostly earned media, not paid media. So it's been very helpful.
It's a great model. I know we've got very limited time left before we switch to questions. So I want to ask each of you, in no more than 2 minutes, if you can just speak to what you see as the key imperatives for advancing women's entrepreneurship in the time ahead, perhaps something that hasn't been spoken about so much, but you see as being really important for us to pay attention to in the time ahead. So if I could start with you, Priya.
Sure. So I think one thing we didn't talk about is technology and the role that disruptive technology can play as an enabler. And I think we've already seen evidence from around the world in terms of how technology can empower women, and particularly women entrepreneurs, whether it's access to online platforms to market their goods, whether it's access to online platforms to get information on what their clients want, whether it's access to mobile money and payment systems platforms. I think technology is a huge enabler, and this is something that we've already started working on through our WeFi projects, but the sky is the limit there, I think, in terms of what we can achieve. So,
Yep, echoing what Priya just mentioned. So our second phase of the project will have emphasis on women and ICT. So how to help women integrate ICT in their businesses to utilize ICT development and also generate more income. As we all know, women are lagging behind men in terms of access to technology and benefiting from this ICT development. So helping women in tech industry to make their businesses more profitable and visible, and also helping other women entrepreneurs who have these businesses in manufacturing and whatnot to integrate ICT development in their businesses. So we will start providing ICT trainings at the center, and also we will have specific incubator dedicated for women in tech development.
Given the fact that I have a research hat on for this report, I'm going to just talk about the additional areas of research that I've been thinking about since we developed this. I think one of the big questions is kind of centers around the relationship among gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and entrepreneurship. There's been a lot of research about women's economic empowerment writ large as an umbrella term, and violence, but specifically, how do these factors play into how successful women can be as entrepreneurs, and how potentially, I think, entrepreneurship activities can be can take violence against women into account in how they're developed. I think also just in general, there's a huge need for localized data. There's a lot of kind of nationwide data available. There's region-wide data, but these very localized data, where especially when there's programs that are being developed in a specific area, sometimes it's really surprising what the reality looks like on the ground, just a few hours outside of the capital that I think are not that obvious. And I think it would completely change the way your program is going to be constructed if you understood it. The example in the report about Bangladesh, I think, is very instructive in that way.
And if I can just say, I mean, one thing, gender disaggregated data
Yes,
as well,
sorry.
right? So oftentimes we do these projects, but then at the end of the day, we don't know, how many women got loans from the bank or how many men got loans from the bank, right? So, I mean, I wouldn't I think it's really, really, really important. I can't emphasize enough the importance of gender disaggregated data.
And even gender sensitive data, just in terms of like what questions should we be asking to get at what really matters in women's lives. It might be, I think what we talked about with the Mongolia project is what a difference it's made just to participate in the project. Even if your business doesn't get off the ground, it can be fundamentally life-changing and other things can happen that are positive in your community. How do we capture that for future programs and
I think
development?
The mantra of sex disaggregated data is one that the Women's Empowerment Program practice every day. And so one of the things that I think would be really interesting would be to have gender research hubs on women's entrepreneurship in key countries as abilities to capture local data and to actually address some of those needs. I think in terms of the whole issue of technology, again, it comes back to the importance of engaging girls in education. The STEM focus is really important. I think also what we've found with a lot of support for women entrepreneurs is it's technology for women entrepreneurs to access domestic markets, not just export markets as well, which is a really important point. And also when women are adept at technology, they can also access online networks to be able to gain greater support for their products, to be able to partner effectively. In Papua New Guinea with the Asia Foundation, we partnered with Google. We're doing a really interesting program to support women entrepreneurs who create these amazing bilum bags, which are quite unique to Papua New Guinea, and to use technology to support them to access people on cruise ships so that those bags can be delivered directly to tourists who mightn't want to debark from the cruise ship but are happy to order online and have those bags delivered there. So using technology in innovative ways, even where there is a great degree of isolation and lack of access to technology. So that's it from the panel. It's now your turn to be able to ask questions of our great speakers here this morning. Can I ask those of you who would like to ask a question, if you can please state your name and your affiliation, and if you could focus on one question, rather than a statement, it will allow a diversity of voices to be heard. So we do have a couple of mics. We have colleagues going around the room. And since there are a few, we might just take a couple of questions. And if you could also, if there's a specific speaker that you would like to direct your question to, could you also please state that? Thank you.
Hi. Thanks so much. My name is Bree Stewart. I'm with the ABA Rule of Law Initiative. I had a question for Zaya. It was very interesting to hear about your approaches and successes with the Business Center. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your strategies for ensuring long-term local ownership and sustainability with the center. Thanks.
There's one more, sorry.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sonia Kelly from the U.S. Department of State. This is more of a personal question. I've been working in financial inclusion for 10 years, and when the Findex data came out that Priya referenced, I just threw up a scatter plot of countries and the gender gap in access to finance. And on the x-axis, I plotted general gender equality measured in education, political, and forgot what the other dimension was, but it was the UN index. And what I found was that there's just a high correlation between gender inequality and inequality in finance. And so I'm really inspired by all the comments about the enabling environment. And I'm kind of wondering if the access to finance problem would get solved if these other things fell into place. Like, would it just happen naturally? Or I guess maybe this is for Priya or for Kate, like, what's the theory of change that's driving the focus on directly increasing access to finance rather than, like, Priya, why aren't you just focusing on changing laws or increasing women's mobility?
We might just take these first two questions, and if you could hold the mic for the next one, that would be great. Zaya.
That's a great question in terms of the sustainability, because that's one thing we taken into consideration from day one in order to ensure the sustainability. And the facility itself is housed under it's located at one of the city municipality building, capital city municipality. So the capital city municipality is our main government counterpart, and they provide us the space free of charge, and two-story building, and also they cover the utility fee. So from the day one, we make them to be like inseparable part of the project. And in our sustainability plan, the city municipality will hand the project over, and we have already staff from the city municipality sitting at the center to getting to know what's actually happened there and be part of the project from the beginning. And the project now has 2 more years, and within these 2 more years, apart from all the regular activities, one of the priorities is to ensuring the smooth transition to the city municipality in order to really keep the momentum, the spirit of support network, and the city municipality has to have this somewhat this entrepreneurship mind to keep the momentum going. So that's what we are working on of our strategy.
That's a great question. I think there's a time element there, that a time dimension, which is that laws and regulations take much longer to sort of address, and cultural barriers even longer. So, in the interim, I think there's a lot that can be done by thinking through what specific kind of barriers or sort of issues there are in terms of the way in which financial institutions operate, and are they in fact making it more difficult for women in certain societies to access finance. So, and I would go beyond just credit. There's insurance, and there's all kinds of other types of financial products and services that women need, and can't access right now. And so there may be quick wins that you can reap, and I think there are quick wins that you can reap just by taking banking to the doorstep. In places where women can't travel long distances. There's quick wins through thinking through alternative collateral, movable collateral, and we're already seeing, the benefits of that. Whether it's in Kenya or Tanzania or Nigeria or Bangladesh, new innovative ways of getting finance to women, produces huge benefits, and that's not mutually exclusive with changing laws and regulations. But while that's happening, I think there's huge potential from thinking creatively about how women can access finance. So.
I think that is such an important question. I think we could have a whole forum just on responding and thinking about that question, and I think it's one that we need to pay more attention to. We have, if we can take another couple of questions here.
Well, thank you very much for the panel. This is great discussion. My name is Mark Schleifer. I'm with CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise. We've been working on these issues from the legal and regulatory reform perspective for forever, and it was great to see BWCCI, the Bangladesh Women's Chamber, get a shout out in the report. We did many years of work with them, including on the program to mandate that the banks have the gender sensitized loan officers and you guys stepped in, ADB stepped in and did the training. My question actually follows up on the last comment about different forms of assistance for women entrepreneurs. There's been a lot of talk on the panel about credit, and we're dealing with a lot of countries where interest rates are high to begin with, right? And so I'm wondering, what the panel thinks about an increased focus on equity. Getting more equity investment, private equity, VC, impact investment going into women-owned businesses if you're going to help them scale from small businesses. At some point they have to get out of the bank loan thing. So that's what I'm curious about.
Hi there, I'm sorry, I'm behind a tall person. Melanie Bixby, U.S. Department of State. I work in the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs. We are implementing the U.S. Strategy to look at Indo-Pacific economic empowerment, basically open Indo-Pacific under the rule of law, figure out how to get women into that part of it. And looking at, you all mentioned not only export markets, looking at markets sustaining and growing SMEs, but the local corporate markets. So we have a pilot project where we have funding to work with the Indian Ocean Rim Association. They're about to launch a women's business forum. Trying to figure out how to we'll be bringing them together with corporations that have signed on to the UN corporate program, so they're already committed, and others that are working in the local blue economy. And I was wondering if you all can suggest, I would like to get Virginia Littlejohn, talk to her, and I wonder if you can suggest some companies, some folks. One of you mentioned that when women entrepreneurs enter supply chains, they often fall out for the many barriers and reasons that we've all been discussing here. I would like to know if there are programs that have been successful in keeping women at the SME level in their supply chains, whether they be local corporations or big multinationals that would be extremely helpful. And my card, so I'll come up afterwards and get yours.
Up the front, just here.
I'm John Brandon. I'm with the Asia Foundation. Thank you all for your comments. Clearly I guess the overarching challenge is that women's lack of access to credit, and that its banking seems to be very male-dominated. Are there any efforts anywhere to help mitigate this problem by training women to be loan officers?
So with the first question, Priya, are you happy to answer that question?
The question about equity. So, absolutely. I think, credit is one sort of constraint that women entrepreneurs face, and I think there is a 1.5 trillion credit deficit that the IFC recently calculated. So obviously, that is something that has to be addressed, but that doesn't mean that that's the only type of finance that women entrepreneurs need, and equity capital is very scarce. In fact, even in this country, I think only 2% of venture capital goes to women entrepreneurs. And I was kind of trying to get a handle on that, and I think it's a supply and demand question where a lot of the VCs in Silicon Valley tend to have only male partners, and so they're not that responsive to applications from female-owned businesses. But then there's also the whole question of STEM, that there aren't that many women-owned businesses in technology, and since all of Silicon Valley tends to be focused on technology, so kind of both sides of the coin. But yes, equity is very important, and in the context of our work, I've been talking to a lot of women entrepreneurs around developing countries, and most of them just cannot access equity from formal sources, and they just have to sort of use their own, or borrow from male family members. So I think that is something that really does need to be addressed, and I think insurance can play a really important role as well. I think that's a great question, and I think we can't just focus on credit. We have to look across the spectrum in terms of kind of financial products with a gender lens, and then find a way to get those products to these women at their doorstep. And I think that also ties up with kind of the loan officer question, where yes, there's unconscious bias, and male loan officer may be less willing to give a loan to a woman entrepreneur. But beyond that, so it's important to get female loan officers, but also important to get them to the doorstep of these women, particularly in rural areas and so on.
Yeah, I also think that in terms of the loan officers, it's having more women is one thing, and yet we have to engage men in terms of their attitudes rather than thinking that bringing more women in alone will help. I think it really needs to be, how do we create gender inclusive, gender responsive institutions through the training and the support, as much as supporting women in key positions to be able to augment that. So it needs to be, I think, that dual strategy.
And if I may just say, putting out the data as well, I was just reading something the other day. So there's a bank in Nigeria called Diamond Bank, I think, which is sort of doing a lot to get out to women, and they're sort of showing the data to these male loan officers and male bankers that actually women are, their savings fluctuate a lot less than men. Even if you look at the lowest sort of income category of women, they're much more conscious about maintaining, their savings balance, and that, they're actually doing a much better job in terms of repayment, and microcredit shows that as well. So, kind of sharing that information and training bankers is critical.
And I think in terms of the impact investing and other forms of finance question, it is important to look at that, particularly even in Silicon Valley, the number of women-owned companies that where women drop out or sell to a male owner within the first few years of business is very high. And so looking at why that occurs and whether different financing models, business models would help sustain women leading those businesses would be really interesting, quite aside from what happens in other countries as well. Kate and Zaya, I also want to ask you if you'd like to comment on the question of either the loan officers and also the question of keeping women in supply chains. And I think the question about specific companies is something we can take offline, and I'm sure the speakers would be really happy to talk to you about individual recommendations.
Yeah, I guess just in terms of keeping women in supply chains, I think We Connect is an organization that works really hard on that issue. And I mean, the specific company I'm thinking about is Target, in terms of what their ethos, at least, and the things that they care about seem like they would be most in line probably with the program that you're talking about. This is another hat that I'm wearing, not from this report, but yeah, but I mean, in terms of women loan officers, we did see some really kind of nascent studies that have been done about improving the numbers of women that women interface with at banks, and it does make a difference. Exactly how you do that on a large scale, I think, is the question. So, I mean, getting women into more leadership roles at banks, I think, is critical. It's just a question of training and getting the pipeline set.
In the short term, giving more information and providing skills and knowledge on how to apply for loan has been very helpful, because at the Women's Business Center, there's a specific session and training on how to apply for loan at banks. So once the women are equipped with that knowledge, they are less intimidated. That's what we learned from the assessment. So they know how to ask the right questions, and also knows that technical terms, and they know what's the differences between different kind of loans. And once they are equipped and have that knowledge, and they feel that they're at the same level with that loan officer. So also training the women themselves has been very
I think also in relation to women in supply chains, one of the things that we've been tracking is the number of companies that are now making commitments over the next 10 to 20 years of shifting from carbon-based to renewables and plastic to plant-based, which provides a real opportunity for women to be at the center of those new supply chains. What we haven't heard a lot about is a commitment by those companies to inclusive economies and to intentionally involving women from the outset rather than as an add-on or retrofitting. And I think that there's a real opportunity for us to go out to those companies and to propose that kind of approach. And so I think that's it's an important opportunity in terms of where the real money will be in the time ahead.
Hi, Elisa. I'm from DAI, and I manage a USAID program called Cambodia Development Innovations. We partner, one of our key partners is a local social enterprise called Chi Investments, and they run the only gender-focused and culturally tailored business incubator and accelerator in the country for women. And the report mentioned that one of the key barriers was a lack of business know-how and relevant skills trainings for women, and that's something that we also try to address through She Investments programs. And I was just curious to hear about maybe some examples of successful case studies or best practice applications of the use of technology or online resources to support skills training for women, skills building and training initiatives for women, specifically if you've had any examples or seen anything related to the transfer of some of the things that you teach or try to, yes, some of the topics that you try to teach in those business incubators, transferring that to online platforms to reach more women.
One more, yes, if we could just take one final question and then I'll ask the panelists.
Hi, good morning. I'm Sarah Fox. I'm from the U.S. Department of Commerce. I'm a commercial officer. And my question is, could you please speak to the efforts that are underway for your organizations where you're training not just the girls that will be entering the workforce, but the boys on helping to create an enabling environment?
Hello, this is Parasu Nepal with IDI. My question is to Priya. Priya, do you have any examples of training local level elected officials in encouraging them for women entrepreneurship in other countries? So I wanted to know if you have some examples of empowering local elected officials and encouraging them for women entrepreneurship.
So Priya, can we start with you? Do you want to start by answering the last question perhaps, since it was specifically directed to you? And then if you want to also say anything about the technology transfers, skill building, engaging girls as well. And then whatever else you don't pick up on, I'm sure our other panelists will.
So WeFi, of course, is very new, and our projects are only just beginning to roll out. So, it's too early to share sort of lessons or results from WeFi finance projects. But I have been at the World Bank for 20 years, and actually before that at the Asian Development Bank, and have worked on kind of many different kinds of projects. So kind of drawing on my own experience and the World Bank's experience. Yes, I mean there's many kind of lessons we can draw on in terms of what the role of elected officials at the local level is in kind of addressing many of these barriers that we're talking about. So I'd be happy to share with you later on offline some good examples both at the kind of municipal level as well as at the village level. In India we call them the panchayats, and they can play a very important role in sort of changing many of the things we're talking about, whether it's unconscious bias, whether it's to do with facilitating financial officers from banks to reach the doorstep, whether it's helping women's savings and loans associations and self-help groups and so on. So the kind of local level elected officials can play a very important role. Sorry, what was the other?
Engaging girls and boys.
So yeah, I mean, engaging girls and boys is both equally important. I mean, I think that is a great point, and that is not just we tend to sometimes focus sort of too much on what we need to do in terms of training and sort of kind of building confidence and capacity and so on amongst girls. But like you said, one does have to start early with engaging boys as well. And in terms of even the other issues that we're talking about, kind of the more downstream issues, I would say that for everything that we've spoken about today, whether it's financial access, whether it's changing laws and regulations, whether it's market access, whether, one has to engage men. Otherwise, we're just, kind of preaching to the converted. So, yeah.
Saya, perhaps you could speak to that issue of engaging girls and boys as well. And then Kate, if you can speak to the technology.
I was going to talk about the online resources, if that's okay. So through our second phase, which will be focused on ICT, as I mentioned, we are going to create an online education platform where we put our training courses online, because we've been receiving a lot of requests from the countryside, the rural areas of Mongolia, which is really far, far away. We cannot do the mobile trainings by requests. So we're going to test, because at the center we provide basic level training, intermediate, advanced level trainings. Some advanced level trainings are 3-day training, more intensive, with a lot of interaction between the trainer and the participants. So we're going to test first among the basic level trainings and intermediate level trainings to put some of the trainings online to see what kind of interaction it will get. And also, there are really popular trainings such as how to use social media and creative marketing. So we're going to put the more popular trainings online, also see how it will be action, and it will be piloted, and to see we will then scale up to put on more training courses online. Also, one of the training package will be how to use online marketplace. So WBC will have its own online marketplace, and we will pilot it and with selected entrepreneurs and train them how to display their products, how to write their description online, and we're hoping to beat Mongolian Etsy. So it will be piloted as well, and it will be only women entrepreneurs marketplace. And also, alongside, there will be parallel training how to use the marketplace. So I will probably have more to say after 2 years how it went.
Yeah, just in terms of training and using online resources, there's a great example in the Asia Foundation's case studies related to China. So I think the big learning is that using existing platforms that women entrepreneurs are already accessing, like WeChat and other ways so that you're not building whole new platforms that are essentially going to go idle right after your project is done. I think it's an important ability.
One other thing that we're doing at the Asia Foundation is supporting a gender lab for boys in India to really support boys in thinking about what it means to be male, in thinking about violence, and thinking about how they are addressing masculinities. And I think that kind of work that pays attention to supporting boys and thinking about themselves is also really important. Well, that wraps the panel. I think you'll agree with me that it's been a really quite extraordinary conversation. I know that if Sonomi Tanaki, who is the gender chief for Asia Development Bank, was here, that she would also be thanking her own team, her own amazing team, including Kiko, who played such a key role from ADB. I equally want to thank my wonderful team here, particularly Elizabeth Silver here in the front row, who's played such a lead role with this report from the Asia Foundation's perspective. Also Eileen and Barbie and Paula, Patricia, from our program. I also want to acknowledge Kim McQuay, who's the Managing Director of the Program Specialist Group. And we're also incredibly privileged to have Carol here, who has been the incredible leader of the Women's Empowerment Program from the beginning, some 23 years with in heading the Women's Empowerment Program. Next year will be our 25th anniversary. So I really want to acknowledge your incredible role, Carol, in really creating the Women's Empowerment Program for the Asia Foundation. You've played such a critical role over many years, and we're really very happy to see you here in the audience today. So thank you all of you for coming. I know that some of you will want to follow through individually with our speakers. We do have coffee and tea in the next room for those needing your coffee infusion at this stage. So thanks again very much for being here.